Assalam alaikum to everyone. Today, another topic which we are going to discuss is our biological components of cell membrane. What are the different components by which our cell membrane is composed of, or what are the components which constitute our cell membrane, and how the permeability of the cell membrane is affected? What are the components which are involved in the permeability of the cell membrane? So, first, plasma membrane or plasma lemma. We can call this plasma membrane cytoplasmic membrane or plasma lemma. The term cell membrane was coined by C. Nigali and C. Krames. C. Nigali and C. Krames in 1855. In 1855, they give the term cell membrane and the term plasma lemma. It's plasma membrane here mentioned, but it's plasma lemma. This term was given by the Paulvey in 1931. So we were having two different terms. First, the cell membrane. It was given by the C. Nigali and C. Krames in 1855. Then the plasma lemma. This was given by the Paulvey in 1931. These were the terms which are coined by three different scientists. Now, plasma membrane. We all know that every type of living cell is enclosed by a plasma membrane. जो भी हमारी कोई living cell है, उसको किसने cover किया है? हर एक cell को, either it's in case of prokaryotes or in case of eukaryotes, all the organisms cell is covered by the plasma membrane. So in other words, ऐसा कर सकते, plasma membrane separates cytoplasm from the surrounding cellular environment. जो plasma membrane ये क्या करता है? It gives us a physical separation of our cell cytoplasm from the surrounding environment. So plasma membrane is ultra thin. Plasma membrane is ultra thin. पतला है काफी ज़्यादा. It's elastic, means it's stretchable. ये stretch हो सकता है. It's living things grow. So plasma membrane can also grow and have the peculiarity of this plasma membrane is that it's semi-permeable or selectively permeable. Means this molecules उठाता है selectively, फिर उसको क्या करता है? Then it transfer molecules from outside to inside the cell or from inside the cell to the outside the cell. Our plasma membrane, as you can see in the diagram, this is the lipid bilayer, which is opened up here, phospholipid bilayer. So the plasma membrane is composed of lipids, proteins. Embedded proteins are here. You can see my on cursor. We are having lipids here. Lipid bilayer is there. Then proteins and carbohydrates. Glyco means carbohydrate. Yeah, see the carbohydrate sugars are directly attached on the outer surface of the plasma membrane. जो carbohydrate attach है हमारे plasma membrane को, ये कहाँ से attach है? सिर्फ बाहर वाले side से. This plasma membrane, it controls the cell. It allows nutrients to come from outside cell to the inside. बाहर से अंदर की तरफ nutrients को लाता है, और जो metabolic waste हमारा रहता है within the cell, inside the cell, it takes our waste from cell inside to the outside the cell. So it also acts as sensors. Like you can see many like glycoproteins are there, or these membrane proteins are there. They act as a sensors. These can sense external signals, like which external signals will be available to the cell. It's our hormone आ रहा है, उसको कुछ act करना है, या तो immunological response. वो आप थोड़ा सा immunological response आगे करिए. मीन जो सेल में है, सेल में कुछ ऐसे receptors है जो सिग्नल, मतलब इसको कम्युनिकेट करना है, इसके पास रिसेप्टर्स है कम्युनिकेशन के लिए, या तो वो कोई हार्मोन आ रहा है तो सेल को रिएक्ट करना है, उसके रिसेप्टर्स उसको आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं, फिर वो सिग्नल आगे भेज देते हैं। या इम्यूनोलॉजिकल रेस्पॉन्स लाइक एंटीजन इज देयर, तो फिर एंटीजन अगेंस्ट में हमें क्या बनानी है, एंटीबॉडीज बनानी है। तो सिमिलरली इम्यूनोलॉजिकल रेस्पॉन्स इन रिसेप्टर्स के थ्रू पास होता है। The cell wall, we are having many examples where this cell wall is not, this is our plasma membrane. Another part is the cell wall, which is outside our plasma membrane. This cell wall is present in case of bacteria and plants. Bacteria में और plants में cell wall होता है. And mycoplasm is one of the example of bacteria which does not possess cell wall. Mycoplasm is the one bacteria, is the class of the bacteria which does not have cell wall. They only have plasma membrane. And even we animals or eukaryotic mammals, we also have plasma membrane which forms our cell surface. Even we can say this is our cell, outer cell. So within in the cell, we are having different organelle. The composition of the membrane of the organelle and the composition of the cell membrane outside the cell is similar. जो हमारा cell membrane है, वो it's having similar structure or similar components which are, it's having similar component to the membrane which encloses our organelle. जो membrane हमारी organelle को क्या करते हैं, cover करते हैं, और जो हमारी पूरी cell को cell membrane cover करता है, उनका जो composition है, it's similar. Means they are fluid mosaic, yeah, selectively permeable, but there are certain proteins which differ. Proteins differ as per the function of the cell. Protein receptors differ as per the function of the cell, but both the membranes are having three components. It's lipids are there, proteins are there, and carbohydrates are there. Now we discussed that we are having three main components which constitute our this plasma membrane. So first is, as you can see, lipid bilayer membrane is there. The lipids are on this outer surface and the lipids are on the inner surface. Now lipids are having two types, not two types, it's are having two surfaces, hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Lipids के क्या होते हैं, दो sides है, water loving and water hating. जो water loving surface है, जो इनका head बनाता है, that is towards the outside or towards the outside of the inner side of the cell. So where the molecule which have both hydrophilic and hydrophobic, and these molecules are called as amphipathic molecules. जिन molecules में hydrophilic part भी होगा और hydrophobic part भी होगा, these molecules are called as amphipathic molecules, or we can say amphipathic molecules are those molecules which possess both hydrophilic and hydrophobic domains. जो ये हमारे lipids है, ये क्या है? They are amphipathic molecules. So these are the embedded proteins here. Some form the channels, or even we are having the directly carbohydrate chain which are attached to the proteins. Even there are some carbohydrates which are attached to the lipid molecules, which are attached to the directly to the lipid molecules. Now, okay, so as you have seen this one example of plasma membrane, as I said, the composition of the proteins and receptor varies from cell to cell, depends on the functioning of the cell. I have taken some examples where we will be discussing how much content of protein, lipids, and carbohydrate are present. हर एक cell का अपना अपना function है. Like if we have to take the cell, like RBC cell, if we are taking, then in RBC cell, we are having 52% of protein. RBC cells are having 52% of proteins and 40% of lipid content and 8% of carbohydrate content. Now see, if another example is there, myelin cell या nerve cell जिसको बोलते हैं हम लोग, जो हमारी myelin cell है, इसमें जो है हमारा protein content, it constitute 18%, and its lipid content is 79%, and the carbohydrate content is 3%. They are having similar composition, but see the variation of their protein, lipids, and carbohydrates. It's as per the functioning of the cell. We have taken the mouse cell. Mouse cell's plasma membrane constitute 44% of protein content, lipid content is 52%, and carbohydrate content is 4%. We always have less carbohydrate content. Amoeba is 54% for proteins, 42% for lipids, and 4% for carbohydrates. These are the different cells which have different protein, lipid, and carbohydrate content. Now, we will be now talking about the first class of our components, which is our lipids. These are fatty acid molecules. These fatty acid molecules are classified into 4 categories. जो हमारे lipids है plasma membrane में, these have been 4 major classes: phospholipid, sphingolipids, glycolipids, and sterols. Phospholipid, sphingolipids, glycolipid, and sterols. Now, जो ये हमारा ये जो phospholipid है, this is the major chunk जो हमारा lipids का है, composed, और जो हमारा maximum portion of lipids है, it is composed of phospholipids. So we can say the phospholipids are lipids attached with the phosphate group. So these lipids are abundant in nature. Then sphingolipids, glycolipid, and sterols. Sterols की best example है हमारी cholesterol की. We will discuss this cholesterol molecule also. It's having important role in the permeability. जो ये हमारे phospholipid है, it's a major chunk. It's a major chunk means maximum जो हमारा है portion lipids का plasma membrane का वो क्या है, वो हमारा phospholipids है. जो ये phospholipids है, ये या तो acidic होंगे या तो neutral होंगे. These phospholipids may be either acidic phospholipids or neutral phospholipids. The amount of acidic phospholipid is equal to 20%. 20% या 20% acidic phospholipids plasma membrane में होता है. और जो हमारा neutral phospholipids है, जो neutral है charge में, it constitute up to 80%. 20% is acidic and 80% is neutral. And the best example of neutral phospholipids are phosphatidylcholine and phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylcholine and phosphatidylserine. ये आप 8 sems आगे इसका पढ़ोगे. You have already studied the lipid portion. So neutral 80% है, and the best examples are phosphatidylcholine and phosphatidylserine. And the glycolipids are there, sphingolipids are there, cholesterol is there. So sterol is a cholesterol. So why they are there, what are the role, we will discuss it. So this was about the lipids. Now the second component is our plasma membrane. Sorry, membrane proteins. Second component is our membrane proteins. These proteins are placed in the cell at different locations. जो ये हमारे proteins है, ये plasma membrane या cell में अलग-अलग जगहों पे क्या है attach है. Like these mostly are involved in the signaling transduction. इससे क्या होती है, signal transduction होती है. ये allow करते हैं gradient बनाने का, किन-किन चीजों का, physical, chemical और mechanical gradients. Like ऑक्सीजन जैसे हमारे सेल के बाहर है वो डायरेक्टली अंदर आ रहा है, लेकिन जैसे कुछ अगेंस्ट द ग्रेडियंट भी जाता है. जो फॉर एग्जांपल हमारे सेल के बाहर सोडियम ज्यादा है और अंदर कम है, नहीं सॉरी, बाहर कम है अंदर ज्यादा है, स्टिल वी नीड सोडियम. सो वाया दीज प्रोटीन्स वी आर एबल टू टेक प्रोटीन सोडियम फ्रॉम लोअर कॉन्सेंट्रेशन टू हायर कॉन्सेंट्रेशन. इट मीन्स अगेंस्ट द ग्रेडियंट. जब भी हम लोग चीजें अगेंस्ट ग्रेडियंट लेते हैं, दैट टाइम वी हैव टू यूटिलाइज द एटीपी एनर्जी. That time we have to utilize the ATP energy. Now the proteins which are the main important constituent of our plasma membrane may be intrinsic or integral proteins. Integral means within in somewhere. It means within in the lipid bilayer membrane. जो हमारे intrinsic proteins है, जो क्या है within in the, this is our plasma lipid bilayer membrane, जो हमारी straight lines है. You can see on my cursor. जो हमारी straight layers है, ये क्या है, lipid bilayer. So within a lipid bilayer we are having proteins. These proteins are called as integral proteins. These are called as integral proteins. These integral proteins may be single helix. आपने प्रोटीन्स का पढ़ा अल्फा हेलिक्स बीटा प्लेटेड शीट्स. जो ये हमारे प्रोटीन्स है which are integral part of the membrane are nature wise they are in alpha helix. So we can be having proteins in single transmembrane, means एक बारी alpha helix है या multiple है, इनको apolytopic alpha helix protein बोलते, या बीटा प्लेटेड शीट जो है पैरेलल और एंटी पैरेलल के जरिए से एक चैनल बनाते हैं, ये वहां पे होते हैं. लाइक द बेस्ट एग्जांपल ऑफ दिस इज द पोरेन्स देयर. द बेस्ट एग्जांपल ऑफ दिस इज द पोरेन्स. मींस प्रोटीन्स अल्फा हेलिक्स में भी होता है, बीटा प्लेटेड शीट्स में भी होता है, बट मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द चंक ऑफ these intrinsic proteins are present in the form of alpha helix. जो भी ज्यादा से ज्यादा प्रोटीन्स है वो क्या है, अल्फा हेलिक्स की फॉर्म है. जो हमारे बीटा प्लेटेड शीट्स है वो बहुत ही कम पाया जाता है इंट्रिंसिक प्रोटीन्स में. नाउ द एक्सट्रिंसिक प्रोटीन्स, extrinsic or peripheral proteins. It means these proteins are not present within in our plasma or lipid bilayer membrane. This is our upper lipid bilayer membrane, and this is our lower lipid bilayer membrane. So we can see that the proteins which is on the surface, on the periphery of the lipid bilayer membrane, or they are little embedded in the lipid bilayer, but still the majority of the portion of this lipid is outside only. So here we are having different locations where these peripheral proteins are present. Now we are having, it's not we are having just single alpha helix or beta helix. We are having different classes of proteins or topology of integral proteins. जो हमारे alpha helix है ये single है, ये double है कि ये multiple है within in the membrane. We all know that our protein is having carboxy terminal and amino terminal. Means हमारे proteins का हमेशा क्या होता है, C terminal होता है और N terminal होता है. On the basis of their C and N terminals, whether the C terminal is facing outside the cell or this C terminal is facing inside the cell, we classify these proteins type 1, type 2, type 3 proteins. Based on our carboxyl terminal or amino terminal, whether these are facing outside or these are facing inside, we classify them as a type 1, type 2, and type 3. If I will be asking you that what are type 1 integral proteins, we can mention that type 1 integral proteins are those proteins where their proteins carboxylic and C terminal is towards the inside the cell and N terminal is towards outside the cell. It means type 1 वो type का proteins है, integral proteins है जहां पे उनका C terminal है वो अंदर की तरफ है और N terminal वो बाहर की तरफ है. This is the one class. Second type 2 proteins are those proteins where N terminal is towards inside and C terminal is towards outside. And type 3 is our जो signal anchor करता है. टाइप 2 में दूसरा एक क्लास आता है जो सिर्फ सिग्नल को एंटर करता है. मींस उसका जरूरी नहीं है कि उसका एक टर्मिनल पूरा मतलब लाइक यू हैव सीन द टेल्स हियर एंड सी, इसका जरूरी नहीं है इसका टेल अंदर हो, इसका सिर्फ जो टेल बाहर की तरफ है सी टर्मिनल, उसका एन का टेल अंदर नहीं होता है. दीज आर कॉल्ड ए सिग्नल एंकर टाइप 2. टाइप 2 क्यों, इसका कार्बोक्सिलिक एंड क्या है बाहर की तरफ, लेकिन सिग्नल एंकर इसलिए क्योंकि इसका चेन अंदर की तरफ नहीं है. देन अगेन वी आर हैविंग अनदर सी टर्मिनल एंकर. सी टर्मिनल एंकर जो ये हमारा सी टर्मिनल एंकर ये किस में आता है, ये टाइप 2 में ही आता है. क्यों, इसका सी टर्मिनल बाहर की तरफ से लेकिन वहां पे उसका चेन प्रेजेंट नहीं है और इसका एन की साइड से चेन है. तो दिस इज अगेन द example of type 2 only. Type 2 मतलब क्या हो, या C and guess also nebulous side. So type 2 are those types of proteins जहां पे C terminal बाहर के साइड से होगा, ठीक, और N terminal अंदर के साइड से होगा. नाउ जो ये हमारा टाइप 2 प्रोटीन्स है, इट्स आर अगेन हैविंग few categories, like we are having सिग्नल एंकर प्रोटीन्स. सिग्नल एंकर प्रोटीन्स गए 3 प्रोटीन जहां पे सी जो टर्मिनल है उसमें चेन है बाहर के साइड से और एन टर्मिनल पे चेन नहीं है. देन अनदर टाइप 2 प्रोटीन इज सी टर्मिनल एंकर. जो ये सी टर्मिनल, इसमें चेन नहीं है सी पे, लेकिन एन पे चेन है. लेकिन एन पे चेन है. हु हैज डन दिस? Now we are having ego single type of alpha helix. Sometimes there are certain signal proteins. This example we will not discuss because ये बहुत ही complicated. Like we are having G proteins. आपने नहीं पढ़ा होगा बेटा वो. We are having certain types of proteins जिनको सिग्नल ट्रांसडक्शन में काम होता है. लाइक जैसे हम लोगों के आंखों पे कोई रोशनी गिरती है ना, नाउ जो लाइट हमारे आंखों पे गिरती है उसको इमेज फॉर्म में करना है, तो वहां पे डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ प्रोटीन्स इन्वॉल्व होते हैं. वो डिफरेंट प्रोटीन्स में क्या है, उनमें 7 टाइप के अल्फा हेलिक्स प्रेजेंट होते हैं जो मेजर एक्शंस करते हैं ना प्रोटीन. जैसे हमारे आंख में कोन्स एंड रॉड्स है ना, हमारे रेटिना में क्या है, कोन्स और रॉड्स है. जब लाइट गिरती है हमारे रेटिना पे, वो लाइट आइडेंटिफाई करता है हमारे कोन्स. तो जब लाइट गिरती है तो ये विद द हेल्प ऑफ ट्रांसमेम्ब्रेन प्रोटीन्स वी आर एबल टू कैप्चर दीज लाइट इनटू द इमेज. इट मींस ये क्या कर रहा है, सिग्नल दे रहा है आगे जाके इमेज फॉर्मेशन की ब्रेन में. सो जहां पे ये मेजर फंक्शन होता है वहां पे ऐसा देखा गया कि हमारे जो ट्रांसमेम्ब्रेन प्रोटीन्स है या 7 डोमेन्स है. मींस जो अल्फा हेलिक्स है वो हमारे मेम्ब्रेन में कितनी बारी है, 7 बारी. You can see here that we are having 7 different alpha helix where N terminal is towards inside and C terminal is towards outside. This was about the topology कि हमारी जो integral membrane proteins है उनकी topology क्या है. Even we are having the another integral membrane proteins which don't have C or N terminals, but still they are there. These C or N terminals are not, ये जो C और N टर्मिनल है हमारे, इनके चेन्स नहीं है. सो दे आर रिस्पॉन्सिबल इन ट्रांसपोर्टेशन. They are responsible in transportation. We are some examples where integral proteins are there, but again, inside the cell, they are anchored or attached with some other proteins. हमारा ट्रांसमेम्ब्रेन प्रोटीन है और उसको अंदर वाले साइड से दूसरा प्रोटीन अटैच है. These are called as anchored membrane protein. Means transmembrane proteins plus inside से उसको क्या है, एक और प्रोटीन अटैच है. Such type of proteins are called as anchored membrane proteins. या कुछ ऐसे प्रोटीन्स है जो सिर्फ पेरिफेरी पे पाए जाते हैं, either outside or inside. So this was about the class of the proteins. So lipids are their lipids and proteins. Now the carbohydrates. Now the carbohydrates, as you can see in the diagram, as you can see here in the diagram, जो ये हमारे carbohydrate जो molecules है attached on the plasma membrane. As I said earlier, these carbohydrates are only present on the outer surface of the plasma membrane. First point. Second, these carbohydrate or sugar or oligosaccharide molecules may be either chained, branched or unbranched. ये तो सिंपल चेन में होते हैं, मींस अनब्रांचेड, या जो चेन है उनके ब्रांचेस बने होते हैं. एज यू कैन सी हियर द कार्बोहाइड्रेट चेन, इट्स अ ब्रांचेड स्ट्रक्चर. सो देयर आर अदर एग्जांपल्स वेयर देयर इज अ सिंपल स्ट्रेट carbohydrate chain which don't have branches, so these are called as unbranched sugars या unbranched oligosaccharides. जो ये oligosaccharides है जो कार्बोहाइड्रेट अटैच है, ये प्रोटीन्स के भी अटैच होते हैं और ये लिपिड्स को भी अटैच होते हैं. जो ये कार्बोहाइड्रेट है ये प्रोटीन्स को भी अटैच होते हैं, ये कार्बोहाइड्रेट को भी अटैच, ये लिपिड्स को भी अटैच होता है. कार्बोहाइड्रेट अटैच होता है प्रोटीन्स को भी, कार्बोहाइड्रेट अटैच होता है लिपिड्स को भी. जब हम लोग बोलेंगे ग्लाइकोप्रोटीन, इट मींस जो कार्बोहाइड्रेट है इट्स अटैच्ड टू द प्रोटीन्स. इट मींस वी कॉल देम एज अ ग्लाइकोप्रोटीन्स. We call them as a glycoproteins. It means polar end of the phospholipids They are attached on the polar end of the phospholipids, which are present at the external surface of the plasma membrane. Or another class is the glycolipids. Glycolipids क्या गए? जो phospholipids के साथ attach है, जो phospholipids के साथ attach है. Glyco means carbohydrate, lipid means lipids को attach है. या glycoproteins क्या हुआ? Glycoproteins means carbohydrate attached to the proteins. ये बाहर वाले साइड से ही इधर phospholipids के साथ अटैच होते हैं या तो प्रोटीन्स के साथ अटैच होते हैं, ग्लाइकोप्रोटीन्स और ग्लाइकोलिपिड्स. ये जो सारे टाइप्स ऑफ कार्बोहाइड्रेट है, दे आर फॉर्म्ड ऑफ 6 प्रिंसिपल शुगर्स, जो भी हमारे डिफरेंट डिफरेंट कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स है, क्योंकि ये हमारे क्या काम करते हैं? रिसेप्टर मॉलिक्यूल्स है. जो भी ये रिसेप्टर मॉलिक्यूल्स है हमारे, these are formed by the combination of 6 different sugars. 6 different carbohydrates से हमारे ये बने हुए हैं. फर्स्ट इज देयर ग्लूकोज इज देयर. कौन कौन से ग्लूकोज का बना है? या हम लोग कह सकते हैं कि these are the derivatives of the glucose, and the 6 examples are D-galactose, D-mannose, L-fructose, salicylic acid, N-acetyl D-glucosamine, and N-acetyl D-galactosamine. So again, I will repeat. We are having 6 principal sugars which form these carbohydrate chains, or we can say they are the derivatives of the derivatives of the glucose. And the examples are D-galactose, D-mannose, L-fructose, N-acetyl uramic acid, or we can call this as a salicylic acid. 5th one is N-acetyl D-glycosamine, N-acetyl D-glycosamine, and the last one, 6th one, is N-acetyl D-galactosamine. So these are the 3 different components which constitute our plasma membrane. These are lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates.